Okay, so this theory is borderline One Piece madness. To be honest, I wasn't going to be making this video, but Oda released something in the last week that reignited this theory. Honestly, I don't know if you're ready for this absolutely bonkers theory. So I think I might have found out one of the last swords that Zoro will wield by the end of the series. Let's just say I think Enma and Mihawk have a lot in common. So let me know what you think by the end of the video. And if you're new to my channel, the way I view the world is by making connections. So let me connect you to my vision, the ParVision. Okay, so let's talk about swords. I had a lot of videos talking about this concept, from my Devil Fruit Boats Float video to the Cursed History video. We know a One Piece concept that's actually tied to Swordsman, that all objects have a breath. All objects are essentially alive. We even found out that the Zoan devil fruits have a will. We also see that inanimate objects can become sentient through eating these devil fruits. But we have also seen inanimate objects becoming pseudo-sentient, and if you're forgetting what I'm talking about, it's Mary. The Going Mary was literally a ship that had such a strong will that it could manifest a visual spirit that Usopp was able to see, and then on top of that, in a single night was able to restore itself into a usable previous state. And on top of that, we have seen that it could speak to people besides Usopp. Even more than that, we know poneglyphs are objects that have enough sentience that it can converse with Roger and impart him with stories and parts of the true history. So what about swords? If there were any object in the series to gain sentience, it would be swords, right? Given how important they have been shown to be. I mean, we've already seen a form of a sentient sword. Two variations, actually. Funkfried, a sword that ate an elephant fruit, and Napoleon, Big Mom's sword homie that can turn into a sword from a hat. Which, by the way, tinfoil hat theory, the straw hat might be able to do this, but I'll save that madness for a different video. So then what does all of this mean about this concept I'm about to bring up? A question we are still unsure about is the Grim Reaper. Is that a sentient form of Enma? Like Mary's Cloboterman, but for Enma? I mean, it wouldn't be crazy. We know that swords have personalities as well as auras. Also, we know to a certain extent wills of the swordsmith are somewhat involved, as Oda has shown us personified versions of a lot of the important swords in One Piece. And at least with Enma, we see that it resembles the creator of the sword, which was a young Kozaburo. We also know a few more things about swords. Apparently, a school of swordsmiths presumed to be the Kitetsu school can place curses on their swords, which are now better understood to be marks of a strong sword rather than a curse, which is usually a connotation for a bad thing. We also know that swords can be turned black, which is something I want to talk about in this video, but before that, the other thing we do know is that, well, two things tied together. We learned that a sword can also have a special ability. Enma specifically is a sword that can automatically exude a wielder's haki, which we don't know of any other sword that has an attached ability to it. So given that, I will have a separate video about Zoro and Enma soon. That being said, the last important thing I want to bring up is that, as we know, certain swords like Enma and the Sandai Kitetsu can test you. We already know of Sandai's iconic test back in Logtown, but focusing more on Enma's test. Enma's test for Zoro was nearly so difficult that Zoro could have died from the test. That is how difficult a swords trial can be. And on top of all of that, once Zoro supposedly passed the test, we are left with this random panel of a Grim Reaper, which I want to clarify for everyone watching. I think this is hands down one of the most non-One Piece feeling One Piece panels, right? Like, I think we can all agree that once we read this panel, we thought Zoro got lost in Bleach or something. When we saw him face to face with a Shinigami, it was like, yeah, this isn't One Piece, I don't think. So yeah, the popular theory right now is that this is Enma, and I have other theories that provide an alternate or possibly a supporting evidence for this theory, like my Void Century Shadows video, where a user's shadow could be involved in blackening a sword. If you don't know what I mean by that, go watch the video, it's a good one. All that being said, a weapon or tool gaining sentience wouldn't be that crazy, to be honest. Besides the examples I talked about before, we actually have several weapons within characters that we might meet later on. A big example here is in the cover story for chapter 899. We see a new giant pirate with a shield with what seems to be a face. How is that possible? Now, this could be an object with a devil fruit, but this feels less like Funkfried, where it was an object that ate a Zoan fruit. Maybe this could be a person that ate a shield fruit, but that would be like the Bari Bari no Mi. But that would also be weird too if it was an actual character. But this honestly seems more like Big Mom's homies. Now, to quickly get through this, an earlier understanding is that it could be a homie left by Mother Caramel, as she had ties to the Giants, but we were unsure of how the Soul Fruit homies worked. Would they pass away when Mother Caramel passed away? We do know that Pandora, the homie she made, doesn't seem to exist with Big Mom. The other option could be that Big Mom maybe gifted this shield homie to the Giants to get on their good side while trying to marry off Lola to Loki. But I want to think that this is a shield that has enough willpower to gain sentience, not too different from a starfish that believed it was human and then became human. For those of you who don't remember, that's the backstory of Papag, the starfish. So maybe it's a stretch, but you know what? It's not the only weapon we have seen that has sentience. We also have a Whitebeard pirate, Rakuyo, who has a chain mace that also is alive, and it has a face, and it can bite people when thrown. And not just that, it bit Kizaru. And it moves like a snake on top of that. It seems like we might get in the future an understanding of how to insert what seems like a soul inside of an object, but also how objects can gain sentience on their own. There's so many objects that have been kind of preparing us for this concept, starting even with Vegapunk. And like I keep on saying, swords of all objects seem to be the kind of object that have the best potential to gain sentience. I mean, even when we are talking about black blades and how they are forged, it's through histories of countless battles, which if we were to compare to Mary, a ship that has served its purpose through tough situations and gained sentience, I'd imagine that a black blade would kind of fit that checkbox of something that would quite literally come alive. And so now I want you guys to think about this. What if we have already seen a sword that has gained sentience, right? Because I keep saying it wouldn't make sense if we have all of these other objects that have already gained a soul strong enough to interact with the physical world on their own. Maybe we have seen someone that, like a black blade, was forged through countless battles, but also goes around challenging people in what seems to be like an aimless adventure to find someone that could qualify as a certain title. If you're a ParVision viewer, you probably already know where I'm going with this. If you're new, I just want to preface this that this is One Piece madness. I know this will sound crazy, but hear me out. It might be that the world's strongest swordsman is actually the world's strongest sword man, meaning Mihawk. Yes, Dracul Mihawk is actually a sentient sword, which would make a lot of sense given that his supposed title is the world's strongest swordsman, and we have seen some extremely powerful swordsmen to the point that we have a lot of the community debating whether he is a fraud. And I made a video previously about how the double layered eyes indicate that Mihawk might be the person with multiple wills inside him, or is someone that has conquered another soul, or is possessed by something. The understanding then was maybe his sword Yoru is the one possessing him, but now after a lot of thinking, it might not be that. It might be that Mihawk is a sword that literally awakened into a human being, again not unlike Mary's Cloboterman, and that could make sense as to why he would be the world's strongest swordsman, because who better to be the strongest swordsman than a sword itself? Now, I know by now there's probably a lot of thoughts racing, like wait, we have seen Mihawk drawn as a kid. Yes, Oda drew the warlords as kids, but in my opinion, that could still fit. When we saw Mary's Cloboterman, it was a child. Maybe over time, the spirit would also mature. Then also, it might be possible that Mihawk was a sentient sword that started as a child and grew into the Mihawk we now know. Also, if Enma is showing something similar, then it is a literal Grim Reaper. It seems like the manifestation of the spirit can be extremely flexible. But there's a lot more to this that makes this all tied together. So let's go back to Enma real quick, because like I said before, Enma and Mihawk have a lot of things in common. Let's read what Kozaburo said in chapter 1033 together real quick. He says, "A great blade can see into you. It chooses only the swordsman who best suits it." Then we get Ippomatsu saying, "A sword chooses its wielder." And Zoro's inner monologue recognizing the situation and thinking, "It came to me. It chose me so it could test me." Okay, that panel is insane for this theory, because I think that literally just describes Mihawk. A great blade can see into you? Honestly, that makes it sound like blades can have observation haki, and Mihawk is known to be one of the best observation haki users in the verse, given his current epithet, but also what his original epithet was going to be as the clairvoyant. Now, this next part, it chooses only the swordsman who best suits it. This is something I found very interesting of Mihawk. He's supposed to be the world's strongest swordsman, but in most tropes, usually someone at the top is a defender of a title rather than a challenger. But oftentimes, it feels like Mihawk is challenging others to beat him. He wanted to challenge Whitebeard to a certain extent, but also there's the panel where Mihawk and Shanks meet in chapter 96. Shanks asks if Mihawk is there to challenge him, and Mihawk says he doesn't challenge one-armed has-beens, which is a major point I'll bring back up later. But going back, even the premise of how Zoro meets Mihawk is essentially Mihawk seeing Zoro's potential and allowing him to live so that Zoro could grow into a man that could challenge and surpass Mihawk. Which brings us to a huge contradiction, and it's exemplified even more when we take a look at Mihawk's VRIC card. It says he looks forward to the day a swordsmaster will emerge to surpass even his rival, red-haired Shanks. It doesn't even say him, which kind of means to me that he recognizes Shanks as a swordsman worthy to challenge him. But then we have the contradiction that when face to face with Shanks, he turns down the opportunity to fight Shanks. A man by current manga standards is built up to be able to beat Mihawk in my opinion. It almost seems like there are certain qualifications that Mihawk is looking for, and Shanks only having one arm automatically disqualifies him as Mihawk's contender, which makes no sense, right? Because if you were just looking for someone to surpass him, Shanks would probably be that person, even with one arm. It's almost as if, again, Mihawk is in search of a specific swordsmaster, even if it's pre-time skip Zoro, who should not even be considered in the same league as a Yonko Shanks. Which now takes us back to chapter 1033. A sword chooses its wielder, followed by it came to me. It chose me so it could test me. Can we all take a step back and think about how absurd it is that Mihawk, the versus supposed world's strongest swordsman, was shown in full flesh in the Baratie arc, and it was completely random, and Mihawk was just saying he was having fun. I remember when I originally watched One Piece, I thought to myself, oh whoa, that's new. I was not expecting Zoro's goal to just appear out of nowhere. I guess this is going to be a short anime. Maybe like a few more episodes and then we got the ending? Oh, how wrong I was now that we're at chapter 1050. And when you think about it, Mihawk literally came to Zoro. He chose to fight Zoro and literally tested him. He used his pocket knife as the first test and judged Zoro's character, and was so impressed that he gave him a serious attack using Yoru. Honestly, in comparison to Enma, Mihawk actually scaled his test towards the user's power level, whereas Enma would have just sucked anyone dry of their haki. Then after giving Zoro his finishing blow that Mihawk said Zoro would survive, which is kind of crazy to think about, I wouldn't normally cut someone nearly in half and think, yeah, he'll live. But anyways, Mihawk gives a speech, which we'll read in a second, but he tells Zoro to surpass him. And just like me, Zeph says, why would Hawkeye Mihawk say something like that? Which is exactly my point. If it were just so that Mihawk could have a worthy challenger and more fun because he thinks his rival is weak and crippled now, then wouldn't he have said something more like, I'm curious to see if you'll one day be able to go toe-to-toe with me and give me a challenge? More similar to Kaido, who is a man at the pinnacle of power, who is jaded by all the pretender pirates before him. But instead Mihawk says, my name is Dracula Mihawk. It's too soon for you to die. Discover yourself, see the world, and grow strong, Zoro. However long it may take, I shall wait for you at the top. Strive with your whole heart and mind to best this blade, fierce one. Strive to surpass me, Roronoa Zoro. It's like he wants this swordmaster that he is searching for to beat him, because beating him is the test. And I read that quickly, but did you catch that line? Here, let me read it again, but slower. I shall wait for you at the top. Strive with your whole heart and mind to best this blade. Best what now? Did Mihawk literally just refer to himself as a blade? I know there's an understanding that like being one with your weapon or referring to himself as a blade doesn't have to literally mean that, but given the context of everything I've said by now, that felt like a cherry on top. It feels like Oda in this fight was subtly hinting at this detail. Even when Zoro prepared for the last slash, he says, that's the strongest sword in the world, not swordsman. Which again is super quick and you wouldn't really think much of it, but given that all we know now, it makes so much more sense now. So then what kind of test does Mihawk have? It seems like Enma wanted to test Zoro's haki amount and control, whereas when you look back at all of Mihawk's interactions with Zoro, it seems like Zoro actually met a lot of Mihawk's requirements except one thing. Mihawk seemed to be so impressed with Zoro's willpower, and on top of that, Zoro has 2 arms. But the one thing that Zoro failed was that his swords broke in his clash against Mihawk. And what was the exact thing that he wanted Zoro to master? He wanted Zoro to master the ability to blacken his blades so that they were unbreakable. It might be that if Zoro can clash with Mihawk without his blades breaking, that might be another part of the test. But that's honestly an interesting requirement, right? Because it almost makes it seem like all of Mihawk's advice centers around the sword itself rather than Zoro. He wants to be handled by a swordsman that would never damage his swords, which would make sense if Mihawk was a sword himself. And that brings us to the part where it's important to have two hands, as funny as that sounds. Right now, I have no basis for saying this because it seems like Zoro would be strong enough to handle a two-handed sword with one hand, but it might be that the type of sword that Mihawk is requires two hands, which is why, though Shanks is probably strong enough, he is automatically disqualified because he only has one arm. Now, there's a whole thing about black blades that I won't get into this video, but I do want to note that if Mihawk was a sword, he'd probably be a black blade, even when you think of what we know of black blades and how they are forged through many battles. Again, honestly just sounds like Mihawk's backstory in his Vivre card, but also his conquest to sail freely to battle wherever, whomever, whenever. Mihawk isn't even a bounty hunter, and we don't know how many pirates are doing what he is doing, and I imagine it wouldn't be that many. And I have a separate theory about what I think Mihawk was actually doing before he found Don Krieg, but I'll save that for another day, or ask me about it on stream. By now, you're probably like, what the heck? Is this something that would actually happen in One Piece? And while I did bring up the example of what seems to be like Oda increasingly making sentient objects in One Piece, from weapons that ate devil fruits to sentient weapons that Rakuyo had and the giant pirate's shield, on top of that, if Vegapunk is next, we're probably going to be getting more of those alive weapons. But even with all of that logic, I didn't make this video because I didn't think the community was ready for this. But then Oda was like, nah, you better be ready. See, the thing that reignited this theory for me was something Oda included in the new movie Red releases. It's something I predicted in my Devil Fruit Boats Float video. So to recap that video real quick, I had this feeling that we'd eventually see the Thousand Sunny also manifest a soul or spirit because the Mary did it. And it was just a theory at the time, but then Oda put out this image of the Thousand Sunny from movie Red and gave it dialogue, which this could be maybe an effect of some random crazy Devil Fruit power in the movie, but at the minimum, it tells me that if Oda is doing this in a movie, that means this concept might actually be even more relevant than we think moving forward with the canon series. And honestly, there's a lot more to this theory, but for you to understand those other parts, you'd need to watch my Zoro Natural Zoan video and my Devil Fruits are Training Wheels for Peak Haki video. In a sense, honestly saying Mihawk might be a sword might not be the craziest thing I've said amongst all of my videos when you take a look at it. But when you really think about it, and again for those who don't know, through the concept of semi-Kikan, so many things might be possible, and that might even be the basis for the Devil Fruit powers in the first place. And there is a Devil Fruit power that literally turns you into a sword or blade, that being Mr. One. And Zoro himself is not too far from that, given that he can use sword techniques with no swords. It's almost like the pathway to becoming the greatest swordsman is to become the greatest sword too. Also, another portion of this theory relates to whether an object can have haki. I think they can, given that, well, when Kozuburo described a sword, he kind of literally said a sword can look into you, which is observation haki. But also, just the premise of how willpower works, if an object can have such strong will it can be sentient, I'd imagine it'd also be able to use haki too. And I said this in a previous video that I think the Mary used observation haki, and that's also connected to the idea that it used Voice of All Things, which may or may not be intertwined with observation haki. But the most interesting thing right now is that even now, Mihawk is not a confirmed conqueror, which is also supported by the fact that Zoro and Onigashima seems to have very little grasp of conquerors and how to use it, which you'd imagine that if Mihawk had it, he wouldn't be as lost about this power because Mihawk probably would have trained it. But either it wasn't necessary, which again would support that Mihawk is a sword theory, but then again, I'd imagine if an object could have conquerors, it would be an object that can turn into a person. So I'm not too sure about this detail. It will be interesting to see if Mihawk doesn't have conquerors. But conquerors or not, I think this theory would still be plausible. So in conclusion, if you like this video, consider checking out my other videos, but also liking and sharing this video and subscribing for more. But really though, in conclusion, Mihawk might be the strongest sword man that is searching for a suitable swordsmaster to wield him properly and testing potential candidates not too differently than Enma might be doing right now to Zoro with the Grim Reaper. Another interpretation of this theory could be that, like devil fruits, swords can awaken as well. And so rather than Mihawk being a sword that could be wielded by someone else, it might just be that Mihawk was a sword and is now a human through an awakening process. And again, we do have a starfish that dropped a very powerful line about how in the One Piece world, anything is possible through willpower. Imagine if Mihawk was a cursed sword, for example, and was wielded many times, but every person who wielded him was a disappointment, and through pure frustration, the great sword named Mihawk became its own wielder to seek out a proper wielder instead of waiting for the right person to show up like Enma's doing. Again, it sounds crazy, but deep down, it kind of does make sense. That being said, this video was not originally intended to be this detailed or even serious. I was taking a crazy idea and having fun, but then things started connecting in a way that I couldn't even imagine. Honestly though, I want to give a shout out to the group that pushed me to make this video because they just wanted to hear me say this nonsense out loud. That would be the One Piece Talk. They are a One Piece podcast talk show, and I will link them in the description box below. They are a group of 4 friends, Larry, Sebastian, Lionel, and Lawrence, and they have a weekly episode talking about One Piece in a really fun way. I've been on their show twice and it has been a blast. They are a really great group of people. When I say they are a group of friends, I don't even mean just to each other or to me, but 100% to their community as well. I really enjoy being a part of their community, and a lot of the conversations we have are actually on our Discord servers. This Mihawk theory was actually birthed on their server, so you can search up the day this theory came to mind, and it's pretty hilarious. That being said, if you like having fun conversations around One Piece, join our Discord servers, also linked in the description box below. I will also link the last episode I was in when we talked a lot about swords and swordsmen. And if you're a keen viewer, you might catch on to some of the details of my future theories that I've hinted at in this video regarding Zoro, Odin, Wano, and Black Blades. I have many more announcements to make, so stay tuned with my community posts or my Discord channel. There's going to be a great surprise for all of my Patreons, YouTube, and Twitch community members. I really appreciate all the support you have given me, and I'll be making it way more exciting in the future for sure. And I'm excited to see all of you on my next live stream also. And so, like always, thank you for connecting with me, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you all on the next ParVision.